speaking, sharing their thoughts and ideas. Just be respectful of that. Some people have a harder time speaking than others. We encourage everybody to come up and share their ideas. So try not to interrupt and just be respectful. At the same time, don't take yourself too seriously. We're here to have fun and learn a few things. We're not enforcing any sort of strict code of conduct here. We're not, bringing the hammer down on anybody. This is a nice, light, loose environment for everyone to get involved and meet people and share their ideas. And the last rule, the Fight Club rule, is if tonight is your first time at CleveSec, you have to speak. And I think that part of our presentation is going to take a long time tonight. Before we do that, though, just a few bits of information about where CleveSec can be found online. First is Twitter. If you are in security and you're not on Twitter, you should be. For some reason, Twitter became the social media of choice for security. So that's where we are. You can find experts of all levels, of all fields on Twitter. And you can find us on there at CleveSec. You can also use hashtag CleveSec to get ideas to us. If you have job postings or if you have a question that you think the community could help you out with, anything at all, go ahead and use hashtag CleveSec, and we'll usually make sure that gets retweeted. Second, most importantly probably, is the meetup. This is where we announce all these meetings, put all the details. Anything that comes up, we make sure to put the information on there so that everybody has it. You can get email updates, and you can RSVP, which is important for us to get the counts for foods and things like that. We have a LinkedIn group, kind of obligatory. I'm not going to put the link here because it's absurd, but you can search on LinkedIn for CleveSec and you can find the LinkedIn group. There's not really any activity on it, but it's there. We have our simple Gmail address if you want to submit a talk. If you have a question that you maybe don't want public, you don't want on Twitter, or feedback, anything you want to go ahead and send us, you can do it through that CleveSec Gmail. We're always watching it. And every CleveSec meeting was recorded, as you can see with the camera here, and all the videos are uploaded to youtube.com/CleveSec within the week usually. So this is a community effort. We do a lot of the behind-the-scenes work, keeping the meetup up to date, announcing everything, but we need you guys to keep this thing really strong and really running. Submit your talk ideas. They can be 5 minutes long. They can be an hour long. Whatever you have. If you have an idea that you think isn't quite ready for a talk yet, that's fine. Come talk to us and we can work something out. We'll help you get up here. The second Tuesday of every month is this meeting here. The last Tuesday of every month is our community night. That changes month to month, but the most common one up to now has been a pub night. So we just go out and complain about security generally or whatever happens at a different pub in the area. And lastly, spread the word. There's a lot of people that aren't on Twitter that don't know about Meetup, that don't have any way to get this information other than through you guys. So go ahead and spread the word. Let them know you're speaking. Let them know that this is a place where people can come and learn different things. The more people we can get in, the more fun things we can eventually end up doing. So tonight's agenda. We have Rachel K. talking about why we should care about women in technology. And then we have Rachelle Bilo talking about the false security that standards and compliance offer us. So, dreaded Fight Club moment. First timers, raise your hand if this is your first time at CleveSec. That is a lot. Okay. So, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is come up here and say your name, and you don't even have to jump in front of the camera if you don't want. Just say your name, say something interesting about yourself, talk about what you do in security if you want. It's completely up to you. But we like to try and foster a little bit of a deeper connection, less like LinkedIn-style connections and more, tell us something a little bit about yourself. So I'll go first. I'm Chris French. I work in application security here at Highland Software. And just a couple days ago, I signed up for the Overwatch beta. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'll be talking for a while, a little bit longer. Not that long, though. Keep it short. I work for Imagine Careers. We're a startup, and we are trying to give people talent agents for their job search. So.
Hi, I'm Rachelle Bilo. I'm also speaking this evening. I work here at Highland as a standards and compliance research analyst. which is a really long title for basically just meaning that I read documents all day and build systems.
Walking up there is too long. All right, I'm Jen. I'm a mobile developer here at Highland as well. But outside of work, I teach figure skating and I enjoy kayaking.
I'm Ryan. I work here. I live across the street. Just trying to think of my interesting thing. I have a few websites outside of Highland that I just maintain for random purposes, as well as like a Bitcoin application.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I contributed to Rachel's talk, so I'll be speaking a little bit with her today about being a woman in tech. I work at the University of Akron as a software developer, and I'm a Girl Scout leader.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I am also with Rachel in Akron Women in Tech, and I work at the University of Akron as well in the graduate school, and in my spare time, I sew.
I'm Kevin Worth. I work at Wastebits in Akron, Ohio. It's a startup. I'm also helping organize Akron Women in Tech. And if you follow me on Twitter, I talk about pizza way too much.
Who's next?
Hi, I'm Dan Travers. I also work here at Highland Software. I test security among other parts of the software. And one of my favorite things to do in my off time is to build computers.
Hi, I'm Scott Nickel. I work for a little company in San Francisco, but I live in Cleveland Heights, so I just work from home. And we do messaging software, and sort of security is sort of a sideline to that. And when I'm not hacking code, I'm playing hockey and taking out my frustrations there. So.
Hi, I'm Josh Belo. I recently decided to go from just being general IT to going more towards a security focus. And I am a Cub Scout leader and married to Rachelle.
Hi, I'm Corey. I also work here in QA, and I have a child due in May. I'm not actually that interesting, so that's all you get.
Hi, I'm Yolanda McWilliams. I work here at Highland Software. I'm a compliance specialist. I actually do testing of our internal systems for our hosted solutions. Something interesting about me. I have 3 kids, and they're all taller than me. And they're only like teenagers, so, yeah.
All right, did we get everybody? Okay. All right, let's give one more round of applause for everybody to come up and doing that. No, it's not easy to get up here and speak, especially if you didn't know you were going to have to do it. Okay, so with that, we're just going to take a couple minutes break here, and then we're going to have Rachel come up and speak. All right, thank you, guys. So you can use this mic if you want, or if you move a lot, or you can just use this one.
Okay, I move a lot, and I also talk with my hands, so
it's up to you.
It's all bad. Oh, wait, how does...
if you want to use this one, just press this red button at the bottom. Turn it on.
Okay. Will it... Yes.
I'm just going to move it to the left.
Oh, right. Oh, so I can't do speaker view. Gotcha.
Oh, can you not?
Oh, I can, because this has to be separate. So, here we go. Does that work? Oh, all right. Totally fine.
Okay.
All right. Pizza time. Hello. Sorry, I don't, like, standing behind one of these just proves how short I am. Like, hi. I should have worn heels. Thanks. Oh, gosh. All right. I don't use Firefox as much as I should. So I don't use Firefox as much as I should because I want to full screen. There we go. Yep. No, it's good. Wait a minute. Got it. I am the... Hello. There's a lot of information. I am the IT support. I was gonna say. Oh my gosh. Oh gosh. Where did I go wrong?
I think that headline is not. That's where the problem lies all along.
Oh gosh. Because I wanted to, here we go. Aha. Because this has speaker notes and stuff. Oh, it does work all together. Nice. Awesome. Well, because when you go like this on this screen, it changes it on that screen, but you can see the slide that's next, and I think the speaker notes will also pop up here. Which is, it's also timing me, which is frightening.
You guys all set?
Yeah.
Let's start whenever we're ready.
All right. Cool. Awesome. Not nervous at all. All right. Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm really glad that the rules said not to take yourself too seriously, because that's awesome. Because this is definitely, I think, my first talk.
Amateur hour.
Yeah, amateur hour is good. But thanks for coming out, everyone. We wanted to just kind of share some of our perspectives of what is happening with just women in tech, how we got to where we were, where we are now, what the current landscape looks like, and how we can keep improving, because as I'm sure everyone is aware, women are underrepresented in tech, and there are some other things going on there that make it challenging to stay in an industry when you feel like you're not necessarily welcome. And again, we're going to look at how we can fix those feelings. So my name is Rachelle. This is Stephanie and Shannon. They're going to be jumping in at different times to share different perspectives. I work with a tech startup and am currently learning to code, but not on an extremely high level right now. And then Stephanie also is getting started in that space, and then Shannon has been working in that space for some time. So we have kind of a variety of perspectives and our experiences. And I'll, like I said, try to keep it short. So I think the best part about this is just going to be talking and conversation. So we'll get to that. So just a quick slide on where did we start. An interesting thing that I actually just recently learned is that women used to be all over technology. We used to be very involved in this industry as a whole. There were a lot of front runners and people who really broke ground in technology that were female. And you can see here in 1984, about 37% of the industry was female, which is awesome across the board. Like for today, for an industry to be 37% female is actually really good. So it's crazy that it was that way in 1984. And now you can see that we've dropped. There are a couple different statistics. The Computer Research Association says that about 12% of women graduate with computer science degrees, but then as you can see, the National Science Foundation puts it at about 18%. So I think they look at, some look at only universities and some look at universities and colleges, so there's some disparity there. But everyone agrees that it's gone down, while most other science-related degrees have gone up. So that doesn't quite seem right. So it kind of gets you thinking like, oh, what's going on then in computer science that's not going on in medical science or other types of engineering sciences? So, you might say, oh, there are, hey, roughly a third, though, still of the industry is female, so that's good, right? Like, people are getting into it, and it's more than just people who graduate, which sounds good, sort of, but then you look at it and you see that, oh, but over half of women that start in tech drop out. And that's significantly more than the number of men who drop out, and it's also more than the number of women who just drop out of the workforce in general, which we know, women are more likely to leave work and stay home and re-enter at a later time, but this is even higher than other industries of women dropping out. So again, something a little bit unique is happening. So this is what we've got, a nice little picture of it. So about 33% of programmers were women in 1990, and again, we've seen that drop. So now we're regressing. We're going back to the 20th century. Remember the 90s, right? Those were great times. So this is where we are. And how did we get here, or what's kind of contributing to this? One of the factors that I know myself and Stephanie have experienced is kind of feeling like the odd one out, known as imposter syndrome. You just feel like, hey, I'm the only woman in the room. I went to a meetup last night on JavaScript. It was me, one other woman, and then about 25 men. Just kind of makes you feel like you're odd, when you visibly look different than everyone around you. And the same is true of other minorities, too. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about are true kind of across the board in terms of minorities, even though we are just going to be focusing on the aspect of being female. So as you can see, this Sierra Byrne, she's worked in IT her whole life, started back when it was more popular to do so for women. And she even says, yeah, sometimes I'd be even if I wasn't the only female the whole time I was there, I was usually the first female hired, and then I might get joined by others, but it was always hard to make that first step. And then Shannon wants to.
So this is a story that really kind of burns my nerves. This story was this Evan Thorley. He's a tech founder. And he actually thought he should capitalize on the fact that women are paid less than men and have similar skill sets. So he was actually quoted in the story, and he's there, like, patting himself on the back. Here are these men. They're rightfully qualified, but they're expensive. So I saw this opportunity of hiring this equally qualified woman, and we just paid them less. So now I have a richer workforce because I can afford more of them. And what strikes me is, while this has never been said to my face, it kind of makes you think that, well, is that what they're thinking about when they're interviewing me? Like, I can get her cheaper than I can get a man. And that's not just, maybe that's not just because we're female. Maybe it's because we don't negotiate or speak on our own behalf, but it's something to think about. Another story is this 20-minute interview with this Rachel Sklar, who founded an organization called Change the Ratio, who's actually doing active work in this area, trying to get more women and girls involved in technology. So in this interview, a recruiter from New York calls. He's male, and he says, yeah, I've sent these women out. They're highly qualified, even more qualified than the male candidates I sent, but the employers always send them back. And when I ask why these female candidates who are clearly more qualified are not being offered jobs, they say, well, they just weren't the right fit for the organization. So what his response was to that was, he said, I just quit sending them on interviews. So these are the tactics. We're not saying, clearly this man thought he was doing something to help these women. He didn't want to send them in a hostile environment. So he stopped sending them on interviews where he felt like they would be put in a hostile environment. But is that really solving the problem when you're not putting women forth for opportunities because you fear that they're going to be ostracized or not accepted?
That's all right. All right, we're going to get slightly sort of depressing, but then we're going to bring it back up, so hang with me. Another aspect of just contributing to the feelings of hostility is the, quote, bro grammar thing. I'm sure you guys have all heard of the whole Gamergate that just recently got, news and everyone's going crazy about things. But This is an aspect that I don't want to spend too much time on because it's also something that ties into not just tech. It's kind of across industries, but I did want to point out the TechCrunch Disrupt. When Titstare was promoted at it or introduced, and it got resounding applause, and everyone was, oh, that's so funny, that's hilarious, that's great. And when women said, no, that's not great, we actually don't appreciate that piece of technology. This is an example of a tweet of a guy that was, active in the startup space, pretty well respected, and pretty much saying, hey, it's okay if we enjoy looking at what we want to look at, it's fine. And so just kind of this attitude of, because it has been a male-dominated space for the past however long, that it takes longer for a woman's voice to be heard. And it took a while he did eventually apologize, but it just took some time because he wasn't used to being told that maybe the way that he's treating women isn't how they want to necessarily be treated. And then to piggyback on that, I'm sure, again, most of you are familiar with Anita Sarkeesian. She was recently publicized with the Utah State thing, where she's very outspoken in the video game industry and kind of pointing out, hey, why do women wear not armor? And trying to get more female characters in video games that actually can be badass and not just be damsels in distress. And so a lot of hate has been kind of sent her way, and she was supposed to speak at Utah State. So someone more commonly known as a troll called Utah State, or made threats against them and said, hey, I'm going to enact the biggest massacre that's ever happened anywhere in the history of the U.S. in terms of school shootings and bombings and killings if Anita's allowed to speak. So she didn't. She had to shut it down. And it's just kind of like, why can we not listen to other people's perspectives? Like, isn't this about what technology is? This is how we progress, right? When we hear other people's opinions. And then similar thing with Zoe Quinn, her ex-boyfriend, fiance, kind of started a campaign against her, used 4chan a lot, used a lot of different tactics, and it got to the point where people were sending her dad pictures of her without clothes on and in different positions that they may or may not probably have photoshopped. So it's just kind of this thing where if these women have tried to speak out and tried to say, hey, we're women, we want to be represented in the industries that we enjoy, we love games, we love technology, can we be a part of this? And they've been met with a hell no, I want to kill you. So a little bit depressing. And then last piece of sad news, the open source community. This one's a little bit sticky because it's hostile in a couple of different ways. Like I said, it's not just hostile to females, it's also hostile to other minorities, and it's also even sometimes hostile to men, which we'll talk about in just a quick second. So that's just something that whenever there's 100 people that are doing something right, there's one person that might do something wrong and just create mass chaos for everyone involved. So these are a couple of people's different opinions on what it's like to be female in an open source space and how it can be hostile just in different ways of making you feel excluded, making you feel like an outsider, making a woman feel like she doesn't belong because we want to be able to, look at these sexually oriented graphics. So if you don't like it, you need to leave. Well, then she feels like she has to leave. And then just someone in the Linux community, I just found this online, Leonard is his name, he was just talking about how, hey, I'm a white guy, and I get ostracized, and I get attacked because I try to defend other people who are being attacked and ostracized, and that gets me put on the radar. So it's just like kind of this, all right, I try to speak up about it, I try to make it better, and I still, it's kind of like fighting the tide. So like I said, side note, abuse online is actually more common than I realized. Putting together this presentation was educational just for me, because 13% of women have said they've been harassed online, but also have 11% of men. So I think there is kind of a larger culture, in terms of the online space that's going on there too. So back to how can we make this less hostile. So I'm going to just quickly play this clip. I was listening to an NPR blog the other day, and their idea that they talked about is that they really think that the reason why women started leaving tech is because of advertising. Something as simple as advertising. It's crazy. Because Apple computers, when they first started marketing to households, they marketed to boys. And so then 18 years later, 15, 20 years later, when boys and girls went to college, boys went to their computer science intro classes and knew the basics. And girls went in and were told, you don't know the basics? This is going to be really hard for you. So it just kind of created this culture of one segment of the population being prepared and the other one not. So we can just quickly watch this video. And
some people have big plans after school.
Maybe this one.
Some people have big plans after school. You know what Elliot's going to do? Jeff, too. Elliot's at work on a book report using Scripted on Radio Shack's Color Computer 3. It hooks up to his TV. And Jeff's at his Radio Shack Color Computer 3 playing the newest football game. But wait, what's Elliot doing playing New Super Pitfall? And Jeff's having a blast with a new math tutor. You never know what you might try with more than 100 programs for fun and learning. Radio Shack's Color Computer 3 comes with everything you see here. Other items each sold separately, only at Radio Shack.
So that, as you can see, was two boys, and they even did, this boy is, nerdy and he's doing this, and this boy's cool and he's doing this. Like, they could have easily marketed to different genders also, but it's crazy to me. I almost don't quite believe that that's the only thing, even though it's the biggest thing that we've been able to kind of say, oh, hey, when this started, then this started, so all right. It's just like, really? Do commercials affect that much of our lives? But I guess they do.
I was saying that radio was, they were linking that 1984 drop that we saw in the first graph with this commercial, and then there are several movies, like Weird Science had come out, and Flight of the Navigator had come out, and all these movies, all these movies showed, these young teenage boys, fighting the world with computers, and there was not, if there was women involved, they were, the love interest, or in the case of Weird Science, the sexy siren that they used the computers to create. So there wasn't a lot of engagement, and all that is popular culture, and that was going on at that time period, and that's the only thing they can think of was linking to that sharp decrease in women in computer science since 1984.
Yeah, 1984. Sorry, George Orwell. So, back to what we can do to fix it. Some people respond with, oh, well, I don't like working with women. They're not as qualified. They're not as smart. It's not as fun, So just a couple things for general knowledge. Studies have shown, and I don't want to quote all of them because there are a lot, that having not just women but diversity in general is good for your organization. Companies that have women in leadership have higher valuations. They do better in business. They have more success, which is what this one says here. Fast Company pointed out, hey, if women are in leadership, that company is more likely to be in the top 20% financially than if women aren't in leadership. So it's just diversity of ideas. It helps combat groupthink. It helps challenge maybe some marketing plans that aren't the greatest, like GoDaddy, who I don't use because of their marketing, so they lost a customer. And maybe they gained more, I don't know, but things that you have to think about. So what can we do about it? Great time for brilliant ideas, right? This is a funny one because our group is called Akron Women in Tech. So who am I to stand up here and say, hey, don't call me a woman in tech. That's just the name of my group. But Nikki Durkin, she founded 99 Dresses, young entrepreneur from Australia, and she wrote a long piece the other week about how, hey, in most interviews, all they want to talk about is what it's like to be a woman in tech. Whenever people call me about TV spots or journal articles or interviews, it's always, so you're a woman in tech, what's that like? And I just want to talk about my business and my tech skills. And she was mostly upset too because her startup did end up failing. And whenever people published articles about interviews with her, they always spun it to, and then because she was a woman in tech, she couldn't get attention and she couldn't get the investors and she couldn't get this and that and the other. And she said, no, I was young. I didn't have business skills. I failed in these areas. Maybe being female contributed to it, but that's not why I think I failed. Like, I think I failed because of these reasons. So it's kind of like, it's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't. We'll talk about later, it is helpful to have women-focused groups so that you can get away from imposter syndrome. You can be in a place where you don't feel like if you speak up, you're the dumb female in the room, in a room of men. But at the same time, I want you to look at my code, not use tit stare. Like, I want to be a person in tech. So this ties into kind of the Goldieblox thing, and I don't want to. I don't want to be too mean to Goldieblox, but I personally, when they started getting a lot of publicity, I personally just.
Company that's marketing.
Oh, yeah.
Lego is kind of trying to market itself as like a female version of Lego, but also with an engineering bent where you can actually make like working electronic and mechanicals.
Is anyone not familiar with Goldieblox? Do you want to? Oh. Well, I guess it makes sense there, right? So, yeah, you know what? I can probably look up a...
They had a pretty famous commercial a couple months ago that had the Beastie Boys song Girls overlaid.
Yeah, which there was a lot of...
Publicity.
Yeah. This is Goldieblox.
Come on, ditch your toys. Girls, make some noise. More than pink, pink, pink. We want to think. Gonna build, gonna grow our minds. Let me tell you, honey. Right now's our time. Right now's our time. Oh yeah. So come on, bring the toys. Girls build like all the boys. Time to fly, fly, fly. Goldieblox, toys for future innovators.
Congratulations, Goldieblox. Intuit QuickBooks is proud to have put your small business on the big...
The message here is give a girl some technology and she goes crazy and everybody gets really scared.
Yeah.
Again, I see the intentions, but it's just not really, it's not really the message. But they're still following it with the current trend in marketing, which is things for girls are pink and things for boys are every other color of the rainbow.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
Yeah, but not pink.
Yeah, and I personally, I grew up playing with Legos. The reason why I didn't get into tech wasn't because I didn't play with sort of mechanical things. I mean, I built lots of things. The reason I didn't get into tech is because after I built websites in middle school, I went to high school and I went into a computer class and the teacher said, everyone's probably going to fail. So you might as well quit now. And I said, all right, I'm taking study hall. So, it's marketing to pink, hey, you're still a female, and it's kind of emphasizing this, you're a girl, so play with these pink toys because that's what girls do, and don't worry about what the boys are doing, and it's kind of, in my mind, encouraging the separation and encouraging the split. And we need to move towards cohesion, towards being tech, not, women and men. So there was a cool article out about how Etsy is attracting women, and Stephanie actually shared it with me, how Etsy is attracting women to their development teams, and they're doing it by just making it public that, hey, we hire women. Women are welcome here. And their female engineers are going up. And it's not because they're only hiring females or something. It's because they're getting more female applicants. They're making it a more welcoming environment, a more welcoming space, and they're actually doing things in the community like coding classes and boot camps to encourage women to take that step forward and make it less scary. So, less intimidating, I should say. And then open source. These are actually from that FLOSS resource. Again, some suggestions on how to make open source more habitable. Just things like, having a diversity statement or a code of conduct. It's a really simple thing that hasn't been needed before, because when a bunch of, dudes hung out that were all white, no one cared, right? You could play Cards Against Humanity, and there were no awkward, whoops, wrong one. But now, there are lots of different people, so we need to make sure that we're being respectful of all the types of different people. And then, like Deckelman points out, invite them explicitly. Like, if you have an open source community, you're like, hey, if you like Linux, come join us. Well, if I'm female, I might be hearing a different message from some of your members. So you need to actually seek out women and make sure they know that they're welcome and that you want them there. Kind of like the meetup I went to last night. I was intimidated, but then when the talk ended and I started chatting with people, everyone was super friendly. They made me feel fine about not knowing the answers to certain questions, and it's just like, okay, now this is a safe space. Now that I've been welcomed and they've let me know, hey, you're okay here, yeah, whatever. Now I know I can ask questions. And then, yeah, it's a long-term thing. We got to where we are over a span of 20, 30 years. So we're definitely on the up. More women are enrolling in computer science classes in college. More women are trying to learn and get into the industry. And I hope less women are leaving, or fewer women are leaving, although we haven't seen that quite yet. But yeah, it'll just take time. So it'll take everyone in this room making sure that in your open source communities, if you see abuse, you speak out against it. You don't let that happen. If you're on a team that has 20 guys on it, you say, hey, maybe we should have like a few people that don't look all the same. Just speak out against it and make sure people know that you like different ideas and you welcome diversity. So yeah, one person at a time. And so this is another quote from the article about not wanting to just be a woman in tech. I'm not a woman in tech, I'm just in tech. I'm just a person doing good work. And Ann Friedman talks again about how it's important we have to kind of create this new social dynamic, right? So we have Mark Zuckerberg in his hoodie, who founded a multi-billion-dollar company. So now, in Silicon Valley, if you wear a hoodie, you're more likely to get funded than if you wear a nice dress shirt and a sport coat and some Birkenstocks or whatever. I don't know. What do you guys wear? So we have to create this new type of programmer. What does a programmer look like? Well, maybe they wear a hoodie, maybe they wear a t-shirt, maybe they wear heels every now and then. Maybe it's, mishmash of people. So that's all. So this was a fun resource. And actually, I think we have time. I haven't talked that long. This was a fun little slideshow that someone put together, just kind of combating the, women aren't as good at math thing that some people say. So how does biology explain the low numbers of women in tech? And this is just kind of showing bell curve of how good you need to be at math in order to be able to be proficient at computer science. And people assume, guys are over here and women are over here. So actually, I think I jumped ahead. I did. How did I do that? Sorry. This is my first time. It's fine. So people assume, hey, men are up here with math and women are down here. And that's not how it works. So this is the assumption one that makes more sense. So people assume men are over here with their math skills and women are over here, and they're just not as good at it. And that since this is where you need to be for computer science, that's why men are in computer science, because there's no women there. And lies to damn lies in statistics. So this was just a joke. Math majors, how much you needed to know to be a math major, and then Moose molds computer science. So not that important always. And so just saying, hey, if here's the line for, where computer science awesomeness and math intelligence intersect, then let's relook at this graph. And that graph, which is what people think is a lie, and what it actually looks like is more like this. So, and then there's a science-y graph. So people who think biology explains why there are more women in CS are not correct because science says so. So yeah, that's most of the presentation. Stephanie wants to talk a little bit also about her experiences on entering tech.
Hello. So I am like the newest one of us three, but also one of the newest people in the group. And I went to a Rails Bridge on Ruby a couple months ago. And it was like my first foray outside of the Akron Women in Tech group. But it's a free program and it's pretty great and they have a great reputation, so I went. But I guess it's always just awkward being one of the minorities in any situation. You walk in and nobody looks like you. We've all felt it in different situations, and no one wants to be defined by only one characteristic. So I went in and I mean, everyone was perfectly friendly. Nobody was outwardly hostile or anything like that. But I went in and just kind of was hanging out because the instructions weren't clear, so a lot of people just ended up hanging out for 3 hours that night because we'd already done all the work that we needed to do. But if you looked around at the people helping, they were walking around and just kind of chatting with people. When they got to me, it was the, how are you doing? Oh, you're already done? Okay. And they moved along. But it seemed like every other station that they were stopping at, every other group of people, it was all males, and they all had much longer conversations. And it's just really hard to feel like, to call attention to yourself. Like they were kind of the people, the experts, and so for me to be a beginner, but to demand their attention when I kind of didn't really know what I was talking about, it just made everything kind of more uncomfortable. Maybe it's more on my end and they would have been fine with, and I'm sure they would have been fine with it, but it's always about the new person and how they're perceiving the situation to be. So I guess that's it. No. And then Shannon as well. She is an experienced lady.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about being the only woman. I've never had any hostility. I've had some really stupid conversations, though. My very first job, my boss didn't want to hire me because he thought I was too pretty. And I almost didn't get the job because I was the only female that interviewed, and so he thought I was the best qualified. If he hired me, then everybody else in the company would think he hired me because I was the pretty girl, and so he thought it would be harder for me just dealing with other people, other coworkers. Luckily, the human resource director told him, who was female, was like, you can't do that. So he took a chance and he hired me, and 6 months later when he figured out I could kick ass, he said, okay, this is what happened. I just want to tell you. Because we were really good friends at that point, too, so he felt comfortable telling me. Another company I worked for was a very small company. They didn't have a maternity leave policy. And so before ever getting pregnant, I had to actually have this conversation. Like, maybe you should consider doing that. I'm in childbearing age. It could happen.
Well, I don't think people realize that there's no state regulation. It's a state-by-state thing, whether or not companies even provide maternity leave at all. So it's up to each individual company to even bother offering it at all.
Right. And I was really close with these people, and I thought I could have this conversation. And I felt like they laughed me out of the room. Like, what do you think you're entitled to exactly? It's kind of what they said. And then they told me that my career would be on hold for 3 years if that ever happened, because I wouldn't be as productive in the office. And I thought, are you really saying this to me right now? I got a new job a few months later, but because I just didn't feel comfortable there anymore. And granted, I could have gotten a lawyer and sued, but I mean, this wasn't on the record. This was a private conversation. I also had somebody, I was working with this kind of equipment, and I was working with the remote control, and he was like, wow, I never thought I'd have a woman show me how to use a remote control. I mean, these are the kinds of things that just fly out. Like, you have to stop and look and say, and oftentimes when this happens, you're the only woman in the room. So what do? Do you go crazy and start yelling at people? You can't do that. You really have to smile and say, nice. So it can be uncomfortable being,
Well, they were complimenting you.
I know they were, but that's the thing. They weren't trying to be crazy mean, but it made me uncomfortable. So
right, but
it's just something.
In their minds, they were giving you a great compliment.
They were. I know they were, but at the time I was like, wow, I don't even know how to respond. So anyway, those are some of my weird experiences that made me feel different and apart from the rest of the group.
Does anyone else have anything that kind of relates to anything we've talked about and share thoughts? Maybe you haven't seen it. Sure.
Yes.
Yes. So I guess I'm kind of a minority because I don't look like a minority, but I'm from Brazil. But because I don't look, I look just like a white guy. So I guess I get away with a lot of stuff. By the same token, I'm a huge proponent of diversity. Growing up in Brazil taught me how diversity is important. And even then, coming up with tweets for your talk today, for the events, and publishing on CleveSec was actually really hard because I didn't know much about the topic. I know it's an issue, but I didn't want to, say something wrong and end up offending people. And tonight you talked about being more explicit about this issue and inviting diversity. Do you have any suggestions for some specific language to use that's not the wrong kind of language, but that promotes diversity?
Yeah, there was, I'm trying to remember the wording. The Miss USA ran a study, and they found that if you change the word from technology manager to digital manager, more women applied. And they were equally qualified, obviously, because the job description is relatively similar. But it just showed that women are more, or have tended to be more drawn to wording that is more teamwork focused, more inclusive, more creative. So even if it is something, insecurity, you have to think creatively no matter what job you're doing, especially in a technology job, especially in security if you're fighting something off. So just including creatively, which I think would be.
Yeah, are you talking about interacting with diverse groups of people? Like some of the stuff that we talked about, people are thinking they're complimenting us, but really they're like,
right.
What do
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, no, just the people that did that were a generation ahead of me as well, right? So, like, nobody my age has ever made a faux pas like that. These were men that were generations above me. Like, they had grown up in a different time. So they had seen their mom, as a homemaker. And so I think they were still kind of getting used to the whole, seeing a woman, like, in the boardroom and doing things and knowing more about something than they did. So I mean, it takes time. It's a paradigm shift. But I think as the younger people come up, and, people that grew up in a different time, retire, I think that part of it will work its way out. Like, I think you probably grew up at a time where you were used to seeing girls on an equal level, an equal footing with you. So I don't think you would maybe, I obviously don't mention physical assets or something like that, don't be a dick, like, that covers it, right?
But one of the big things you can do, though, is if you do get caught in a situation where you have found that you've said the wrong thing or someone calls you out on that, don't lose your mind and aggressively attack them. Just because that's what you see happening a lot right now, and there's no real reason for it. Just either, like, admit you made a faux pas or just delete it without any fanfare. You don't need to make a bigger deal of it. Maybe privately say you were sorry or something like that, but you don't have to, don't go on the offensive.
I just wanted to say, I follow stuff like this with great attention. I have two daughters, oldest was 4, and I follow all the stories of encouragement and reinforcement and things that help build women up to have the same esteem, to have the same expectations, so that I don't perpetuate those mistakes. Just because I'm scared to death of them growing up and being crapped on one way, it ruins them for years until they find that opportunity. I mean, we try and teach them that they can do anything they like to do, period. I don't care if it's all paint on wings. If that's what you like to do, that's great. But you have to know that there's the choice. There are these other things. So I follow all of the women in tech movement stuff like that to find those stories of encouragement, to find where people have built themselves up because of their ability. experience is what I noticed, so that I can try and facilitate that with others.
One of the most frustrating thing about that, I mean, what you're doing is awesome, is then they go out into the world, like in school, and they're just told the exact opposite thing. And it's so hard to counteract everything because you don't know what's going on. You don't really know what they're being told out there because they don't always tell you everything. And
An awesome place to start. There's a girl, and I can't remember her name. Actually, she's a woman. Sorry, I just made a mistake.
that's a good one for your Twitter.
We make mistakes too.
We are women. We are not girls. Girls are children.
Especially not girls and men. Don't ever do that. She is really big at Stanford, meeting the entrepreneurial center over there. I was reading her book, and she mentioned how she is an engineer. She's friends with a lot of female engineers. They all have dinner parties all the time. You know, they hang out, they talk. And one woman had a 4-year-old son. And at one point, came in the room, or she was talking to him and said, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, do you want to be an engineer?" That he said, "Well," he said, "Yeah, engineers are for girls." you can do a lot of good.
Yeah. No, it's just good to be open to anything. It's just a general policy.
Well, I don't remember ever being told no about you can't do that thing and then reasons like that. I just want to make sure they have the same.
Yeah, it's subtle though. I mean, nobody ever told me no either. It was never an explicit, no, you can't do this. When I started in college, and I think there might have been something elusive to this in the presentation, the boys were talking about, oh man, I did this sick code like over the weekend, and I had 0 programming experience when I started my degree. And so you sit there and you hear that and you think, all these people have experience and I don't. And of course they're not including you in the conversation, number one, because you probably you can't contribute to this conversation. And number two, you're different. You're a girl. Like, we're not sure what to do about you yet. But I stuck it out because I really was interested in the subject and I was good with computers and I liked working with them and I wanted to learn. So I thought, you know what, that's fine. I'm going to sit here in my little corner and I'm going to do my work, and as long as I'm not failing out of classes, I'm going to keep going. There was nothing else I wanted to do. You know what I mean? I think other women that go into that, they're like, you know what, screw this. I was like half tempted to go into finance anyway, so I'm just going to go. You know, nursing school was my second choice. I might as well just go. A lot of pharmacists I used to work with, I used to be a pharmacy tech when I was going to college, were engineers that went to pharmacy school because that's where their credits transferred. So I didn't have that, though. I didn't have a backup plan. So I said, you know what, that's fine. Like I said, as long as I'm not failing out. And I got better grades than 90% of the guys in the class. So once I started to see that, and they started to see that, they were like, hey, can you like be in my group? Can you help me with my homework? We're going to study for this test. What do you think is going to be on the test? Like, you know, and I was like the star pupil, and I was like the most popular kid in class. But you have to get through that, you know? I didn't have a choice, but other people do. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to echo a little bit of what Lauren said. We had actually, one of the reasons we started this group was because there's another infiltrate group in the area, and we've never seen anything at it. One time there was a woman there, but she turned out to be just a sponsor, and she was just going to talk about her company for a few minutes and all that. So that's something that we've done internally at work to make sure we get women for to get perspectives. And in this group, we also want to make sure that we build some sort of diversity. And like Martin said, when we were trying to put the tweets out for this particular meeting, we were running into all kinds of like, should we say this? Because what we ended up doing was trying to balance, should we be making a big deal that women are coming out to speak, because it's not a big deal really, because women should, but also it's a big deal that women are coming to speak in the infiltrate because that doesn't happen. So we're trying to strike this balance. So what I'm wondering, I guess, is, do you have any advice for striking that balance? Or are we overthinking this? Or
I think you can totally advertise that, women were coming to speak. I mean, that's the whole focus of our group, so it's definitely something that something to be aware of.
It's a little weird because I'm getting tweeted like every day. But the wording was very good.
Yeah. No, just be like you would, you obviously want to advertise it and just say, this is what the topic is and this is who's coming out. You guys should come and hear these people speak. And that's what I think is the most, because it's such a hard, how do you change it? Like, you can't change somebody's mind. I can't change somebody's mind and make them think that I'm worthy or capable. But if more of us come and do this, and more of us put ourselves up, and we talk about the technology that interests us, and we show that we can have a conversation about this, and that we do know what we're talking about, and the way social media is, I mean, this is going to be on the internet. So if we see more of that, and other girls and other women see more women talking and speaking about this. So I love what you guys are doing here, and I really honor you for giving us the opportunity to speak and making it a welcoming environment, because we're not public speakers. We don't do this on a daily basis.
Something to also remember, though, is something to remember is if you are trying to encourage diversity, inviting women to come, or wanting to hire more women or other minorities or something like that, don't open it up to this and then end up only talking to people who look exactly like you. We actually had that situation where a man came to one of the events, and there were two people giving the presentation, Lindsay and Kevin. Lindsay and Kevin were standing right next to each other. He walked up to Kevin, spoke only to Kevin, gave Kevin his business card, and then left. Lindsay's actually the one who really ran the class. Kevin said a couple things. So, I mean, he was obviously there looking, it's advertised as a woman in tech thing, so he was obviously there for that purpose. But then why did he only talk to Kevin? He didn't talk to anybody else. Like, that's a really weird situation. So, and that happens I was up for a job at an oil refinery. They wanted to hire more diversity. They ended up hiring 25 men, white men, and a woman. Like, what? I don't really know what the point of that was, because they didn't end up with what they were trying to do at all. So, I mean, just keep in mind that, you know, if you do invite women and they're sitting over in the corner because they don't know anyone else in the situation, make sure to talk to them. Don't continue, you know. I mean, you're not actively excluding her, but it's more passive, and she probably has noticed.
I like the introduction in the beginning. Make everybody do it. Everybody's got to get up and participate, and so that's the kind of thing that you got to do to foster. It's like just treat women and treat your tweets, and just like you would any other person. Yep.
My wife is attached. She actually started to apply initiatives, which is seemingly an easier field to get into. And she transitioned into telemedicine. Now she's national coordinator for telemedicine. And we have a lot of girls in the national coordinators.
Wow.
And first of all, people say, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's awful. He's apparently never heard of shit.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's good for everyone to be well-rounded, not just girls. I mean, boys are being pushed in the complete opposite direction, and that's not working out well either. So it's just, I mean.
Thank you, everyone.
I feel uncomfortable.
You guys come back up here for 1 second? Sure. So, yes, all three. So, those of you that haven't been here to CleveSec before, which is a lot of the room, we have a little tradition that we give a little gift to our speakers that come out. I don't know if you guys know, because you're not so much into security, but we have the distinct privilege of hosting the InfoSec Sage Twitter account, which you guys should all check out. And he has given us these bottles. These are a message in a bottle. Each one has a personalized message from the Sage and is also an 8 gig flash drive.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming out and speak.
Yeah, thank you.
One more round of applause for these guys. All right, so we're going to take probably a 5-minute break. I think we probably still have some pizza left, and then we're going to have Rachelle to come up and talk about compliance. All right, guys, start settling back in here. Just a few announcements to go over before we move on to the next talk. So for our next community night, Pete over here was nice enough to give us the idea that Cedarly Theater is going to be showing Citizen 4, which is the Edward Snowden documentary. They've pushed the release of that back a week, so we're not exactly sure what their plans are with that, but if it's available when our community night comes around, we'll be having our community night out there, get together and see that documentary. If not, we will just have another pub night. So keep an eye on the meetup, and we'll be sending tweets out and all those things to make sure you guys have all the up-to-date information as we decide things. So right now, we can talk about job openings. I know at Highland here, we have a couple job openings for security specifically. Our cloud services department is looking for a security administrator, and QA is always looking for software testers. So you can come talk to me anytime, and we can see about moving you towards that job. Does anybody else have any openings in the area that they'd like to announce? No? Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and move on to Rachelle's talk. Oh, it's over here. I was like, I thought we had it. There you go.
Okay, so I'm Rachelle Bilo. I work here at Highland, like I said earlier, and I'm actually a standards and compliance research analyst. So today I want to talk about the false security that compliance gives to organizations. And by no means am I saying that standards aren't important, but they're definitely not what makes your organization secure. So I'm sure that some of these terms on here look really familiar to you. You probably recognize like a DOS, maybe even social engineering, SOX being Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and the HIPAA. What this really is showing, though, all the gray ones are terminology or actual standards that are related to compliance, and everything in red are terminology that we use when we talk about security. And from even that simple diagram, we can see that compliance is not equal to security. Let's use an analogy here and talk about being a motorcycle driver. So in Ohio, it's actually not a requirement for you to ride a motorcycle with a helmet or any other type of protective gear. And we see that Marge and Homer here having a great time out on the road. So they're in compliance with the laws right now. He probably had to go through the standard, test, written test, driving test to ensure that he could be out on the road. But he's obviously not driving in a secure fashion. And it may not seem like a big deal right at this very moment. It's sunny blue skies, the road's clear, they look like they're smiling, having a good time. But what happens if the unexpected occurs? What happens if a tree falls in the middle of the road? Well, I don't think that they would be in a position at this point to really protect themselves, and I doubt that falling off that bike, Marge's hair would be able to protect her head. Maybe they also didn't look at the weather that day, so while they're out driving, they get stuck in a rainstorm. And yikes, now they're finding out, where did we go wrong? So really where they went wrong is by assuming that being compliant with the law means that they're being safe. So let's talk a little bit more about what these terms actually mean. When we talk about compliance, we're talking about an organization's actual control over processes within the organization, typically aiming at storage, archival, and retrieval of data within the organization. And we have an array of standards. They can be domestic from the state or federal level, and even to the international level if you're dealing with a multinational organization. And actually in the US, there's over 8,000 different standards that your organization may comply with. And obviously there's some industries that are more stringent than others as well. So a banking industry or a healthcare industry would be way more stringent than, I don't know, a hair cutter, something. So we think about like all the different standards that people have to be compliant with. And if you start to think about all the things that we would maybe have to comply with, it's astounding to think then of all the different auditing practices and all the reporting agencies that you'd have to report to. So the biggest thing with standards is that, like anything else in the world, they change. And they typically change on a standard time frame, every couple of years having a new regulation rewritten with changes to the model. And it's the organization's responsibility at that point to make sure that they're keeping up to date with that information and modifying their organization to meet that standard. Now, when we talk about security, we're talking about protection of data, and specifically protection of data from unauthorized access. So compliance was all about getting to your data. Security is about protecting it. And there's three primary elements of security that we'll often talk about, and we call it the CIA. So we're talking about the confidentiality, which is preventing unauthorized access and practicing the need-to-know methodology. And we're talking about integrity, which is preventing modification from a record in any point of your process, whether it be in storage or during transit or while it's being processed. And we're talking about the availability of your documents. So preventing unauthorized users from preventing authorized users access to those systems. Every year, Verizon releases a data breach investigations report, and this is the statistics that they came out with for 2013. So in 2013, there were 1,637 confirmed security breaches. A security breach is actually defined as an incident that resulted in the full disclosure or potential exposure of data from a system. And then there were another 63,000 plus security incidences, which they define as a security event that compromised one of the CIA pieces. And they also showed an increased attack on pay card systems. So these systems often being ones that are mandated to be PCI compliant. Now, a great example of this, obviously everybody heard about the data breach that happened at Target. So in December of 2013, Target was attacked, and they found that 40 million accounts of debit and credit card holders had been removed from the system, including encrypted PIN numbers. The irony here is that just 2 months before this attack occurred, or this breach occurred, they became PCI compliant. So obviously the compliance didn't save them in this case. And the biggest thing here is that Target's still trying to recover from this breach that happened at the end of 2013. So even though they were compliant, they weren't secure and the breach occurred, they now have to deal with ensuring to their customers that their data wasn't actually removed, or if it was removed, if they were one of the targeted, to let them know. So they're wasting their time and resources to battle this from the inside of the company. And they're also doing damage control, because who wants to shop at a store where you feel like every time you swipe your card, you're putting yourself at risk? So here's some reasons why compliance doesn't equate to security. Really, all compliance comes down to is a checklist. So being compliant literally says, check off these boxes, indicate that I meet the criteria, and give me an approval that says I'm compliant. But organizations need more than that. They need protection. They need a secure environment, especially to keep up with the ever-changing technology landscape. And most of the time, when you look at a compliance standard, it's the bare bones of security, which is implied. So a lot of times you'll see instances where it talks about user group security or passwords. It doesn't ever tell you how to build a secure network using the hardware. It doesn't talk about firewalls. It doesn't talk about anything that you would actually need to make your system more secure. And again, being compliant really only means that you're complying with whatever checkbox you're marking off. Security, on the other hand, is all about, again, protecting our data. This is a piece of technology that evolves with the landscape. So as new technologies come out, or as old technologies are obsolete, we have to evolve the landscape that we have within the organization to meet those criteria. And also with security, we're talking about doing risk assessments and audits to find vulnerabilities in our systems. This is also often an expensive process, but well worthwhile, so that you're not trying to save yourself after a breach has occurred. And the more secure that you make your infrastructure from the start, the more reduced threats you'll face. So let's go back to the motorcycle analogy. I don't know my left from right, so I apologize. I have to think about this. On the right-hand side, you see the man who's obviously not ready to go out and ride a motorcycle. This image will clearly show you that once you have an issue with security, and maybe you're just compliant, but once a breach occurs, you have all sorts of things that come down the line afterwards. Fines and fees, insurance claims, people canceling their accounts or not wanting to do business with you. And probably the most damaging one is that you have damage to your reputation and you have to rebuild your brand. And if you would have just taken the time in the beginning to dress appropriately for riding your motorcycle, or built up your system the way that you needed to secure it from these kind of breaches, you wouldn't be in this situation, or it'd be less likely. Probably easier to recover from and less fines as well. And we can do that by having secure client-server architectures, implementing firewalls and antivirus software, hiring an IT staff, whether it's in-house or even outsourced, and doing things like performing regular security audits on our system. So now let's do a little bit of a cost comparison, because that's what it really comes down to in an organization, right? If something's expensive, we're not going to touch it. Okay, so when you're required to do something in compliance, like with PCI, you have no choice but to pay the cost. On the small side of PCI, we're talking organizations that have fewer than maybe 100 employees. You're spending $35,000 just to say that you're complying with PCI. And that does not include any of the maintenance costs from thereafter. For a large multinational organization, we're looking at closer to $500,000. Substantial costs for an organization. The Poneman Institute did an actual study on this and found an estimate that $3.5 million are spent every year in order for industries to meet specific standards within their industry. On the flip side of that, though, organizations that are found to be not compliant, so that could mean that either they didn't implement the requirements or that there was a breach and they were found to be non-compliant at the time of the breach, cost them over $9.4 million. That's a difference of that's like 2 times more. Now, when we look at the cost of security, it's definitely a cost, and it's a cost that's upfront for most organizations. Definitely more for smaller organizations. It's really hard for a small organization to pay for a strong security infrastructure because we're talking about paying for hardware and software and hiring some type of personnel. And the SANS Institute says that an average of $15,000 in initial costs just for the hardware and software alone is what you could expect to pay up front. So if we build a secure system and we still have to comply, on a small organization side, we're looking at almost $50,000 just to get to that point. So wait, now you're probably wondering, well, if they both cost so much and I have to be compliant because that's part of the industry standard, why wouldn't I just be compliant? You definitely shouldn't worry just about compliance, because being compliant doesn't mean that you're eliminating those non-compliance costs. You can reduce those non-compliant costs, that $9.4 million a year in the industry, by making sure that you have a more secure system. And again, we're not just measuring this in dollars. The upfront cost is way more expensive when you're talking about building a secure system, but in the long run, having a breach on your system, even after you spend the money to be compliant, like with Target, you're spending way more afterwards in damage control and in rebuilding that brand and that system. So remember, it's better to be secure than to be compliant. Anybody have questions?
Yeah. So the cost of PCI compliance, is that like for certified compliance, or that's just the cost of getting your systems up to that compliance level?
Yes, that's actually like for the cost of building out the system and going through the compliance audit to ensure that you are compliant and getting the stamp of approval.
So the actual stamp of approval will cost anything, or do you have to do that?
Yeah, you have to pay for the auditing practice, so that's all built into those costs.
Kind of a leading question, but are all auditors the same? Are they all evaluating you objectively?
So I actually haven't went through an audit yet here, which is one of those things that we're still waiting to do. But with the audit criteria, they literally like have a list of things that they tell you specifically what they're going to look for. So in the case of like on base here, we can par for par match, like, okay, if we set this specific setting, we know that we'll meet this criteria and we move on to the next thing. There's still a lot of instances in a standard where we look at it and we say, there's nothing, this is out of the scope of what we can do. We can't guarantee that whoever is using our system will actually be in compliance with the standard because we're not touching that part. Maybe it has to do with something on the network or something about granting specific user rights. And one of the biggest costs with this, too, you have to remember, is about training, right? So we can talk about having a compliant system, but if you don't train your users on how to create a strong password or why you need to not share those kind of information, and you don't train them on the standard and how to protect themselves, you're still in a lost situation.
So we established that compliance isn't necessarily within security, but how do you feel about people or organizations that might not have as much experience in security using the compliance standards as a baseline from which to grow their practices?
I think it's an awful idea. Actually, when you think about it, really all compliance does is tell you to set user groups or passwords. And really, what you're setting yourself up to do is pay thousands of dollars for some type of standard to make an auditing body say, yes, you're compliant, than to turn around and have somebody breach that and have to pay the fines to the same auditing body because you weren't able to handle a breach. So I think it's more important to be building secure systems, training your staff, having somebody on site who actually knows how to monitor and network and watch for those vulnerabilities up front than to do it as a secondary piece of your building up a business. I actually had a really interesting discussion about this with a software testing community group, and one of the big things that we kept going around about is that when it all comes down to it, I don't know that I would ever be proud as somebody who, developed a product to stamp on the outside of it that I was compliant with any kind of standard, because it's all about how you implement it then thereafter as well. What I would be proud to put on there is something like Gray Hacker approved, right? Where we know that somebody was in there who actually had the skill to know how to find those vulnerabilities, test out the system, couldn't find anything, or maybe found something, but we were able to fix it and negate that up front. So that's another big thing with compliance and security. When we talk about compliance, we're talking about reactory costs, so stuff that you have to do after something happens. When we talk about security, we're talking about costs that come up front. So it's provision, or I don't know, upfront costs. Yeah.
So a little bit to just this last point, do you feel like people that achieve this compliance might give them an overconfidence about their actual security level and lead to more breaches because they feel like they passed this test for them?
I do think so. I think that a lot of times within the standards that there's language that makes it sound like if you do these things, your data is protected. So, for example, I'm currently working on a standard called SAKI, which is a Finnish standard that has to deal with medical record transmission. And it's really interesting because almost every single part of that document reiterates that you need to have control over the document at all times. You have to know who's touching it. You have to know what's going on with the document. But it's really not anything that you can specifically control. You have to know more about the network and how it's being used in the full process of the system. And oddly, we don't have any of that information. So we don't know how they're going to be implementing it or how they're going to be using it. So it makes it really hard to say for sure that if you do this, you'll be compliant. But once they have that stamp of approval, I very much believe that they'll just go hit the ground running with that. Yes.
From your experience, do all, or at least the majority of standards and compliance, I guess, regulators require some sort of frequent re-certification or re-compliance audits every now and then?
Normally, yeah, it's every couple of years or so, 2 to 3 years typically. If they have like a major change to the standard, they typically require you to prove that you can meet the new requirement changes. Those don't happen as often. They're normally slated to happen every couple of years, but with the standards and regulations industry, those committees sometimes drag those out for years and years, and then you have ones backing up against the other. So.
Yeah, that was my next part. The next part of my question, because you mentioned how security has to be adapted to technology, and I'm pretty sure that 2 years is probably an eternity with these technologies. So you can't, if you're waiting 2 years to be able to be recertified in PCI or whatever, chances are you're already way far behind what the adversary can already do.
Exactly. Which is why it's important to know how to protect your system from a security standpoint instead of just relying on those compliance standards. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. So PCI is a little more stringent because it's specific to like payment card industry and data and how your payment card is used. When you come into like industry specific standards, they're much more explicit and a lot more stringent than like HIPAA is way more stringent and explicit than pretty like any of the ISO things. And when you look at them too, you'll find that something like HIPAA actually requires that a risk assessment happens before you do anything related to the standard. And you actually have to manage it from a risk assessment standpoint, which is very different than a lot of the standards that are out there today. And I think a lot of the ISO ones are a joke, honestly, but that's just my opinion. I feel like really all that it is just a way for them to say that, you know, like you said, it's a crappy product, but we were able to get the stamp of approval. And a lot of times when it comes down to that, somebody who is working, and usually we see that in manufacturing, right, where you have an ISO standard like 9000, and you have a part or a piece, like maybe your brakes, and you're working on brakes, and all of your company, all it does is create brakes for cars, and then you send out your brakes. And if you say, yes, I meet the bare requirements of ISO 9000 and I ship my brakes out to whatever other car manufacturer and they use it, the fault doesn't come back to the brake company. It's still at the fault of the company who made the car that had whatever faulty mechanics. And then you have to get into this huge lawsuit on, you know, pointing fingers and who's to blame. So it's a mess.
You had mentioned that security is a better practice early on. If you're working in a small company, is there a good way to talk them into maybe taking, because I feel like a lot of times it's like it's a cost that they don't want early on. Is there a good strategy for talking security early on?
I think maybe it would just be beneficial to show them what happens when you aren't. You know, it's, again, it's way, like the cost benefit analyses are there. The Pondman Institute has an entire report out that shows like the cost benefit analysis of compliance versus a secure system. There's a lot of other, SANS Institute also did one. So there's a lot of different groups out there that are really trying to push this idea of like making sure companies realize that they're not the same thing, and that when you're complying with something doesn't mean that your system's secure, and trying to negate that cost up front instead of reacting to it later. And maybe that's just a good way to tell them, if we do this now, we won't have to react to it later and take on all this other costs. And again, it's not about the money, right? In the long end, you're trying to build a brand when you're a new company. You're trying to get people to notice you. And if you have a significant security breach at the beginning, who's going to trust your product, trust your knowledge that you know how to build what you're building or do what you're doing?
It should be fairly easy in the last 5 years to find a comparable story to whatever it is that
yes.
There was the iPhone app that pulled every contact on an iPhone whenever you loaded their app. There's Target and Home Depot losing all their payment cards. The problems with security cover all ends, and because the internet is wide open, everything connects, if not to it, through it.
Yep.
Finding a couple of comparable stories that are really hit home. I mean, here at Highland, we got lucky. We have somebody who's kind of on the executive level in development who's pushing it. And so when he pushed it, and the CTO got interested, now we have 2 people on it who they just pushed the policy down. They said we need to get more concerned about security. We need to focus on this. We need to focus on that. We need to get better. Being that lucky, having somebody in on that level isn't going to happen to everybody. You're just going to have to make a crusade. Sadly, right?
Yeah. And I would also say, too, if you're looking for a really good talk, I'm sure everybody here has heard about the healthcare.gov craziness that happened, So Ben Simo is actually the person that they said, hacked the system. And he really didn't hack the system. He used the knowledge that he had as a quality assurance tester or a software tester to really find that all of these things were happening. And all he did was write a blog about it. And every year there's a conference that happens called CAST, and you can find all of their videos on YouTube, but Ben Simo did an entire talk on how he brought down healthcare.gov and what it meant. And it was a fantastic talk, and it really showed, why you don't just slap things together, right? Like that's a great example. That's our personal health data out there on the web for anybody really to find. And the things that he found in there, the data mining, like minimal data mining that he could do to get back like social security numbers and like all this information was just insane. So if you have time, Google that, look it up on YouTube and watch that talk. It might give you a really good perspective as well.
We'll worry about security later, and that's where we get holes, because now you're trying to keep lights out of your house.
Yeah, patchwork.
Or build it with the right materials from the get-go, then
the cost is way higher. You have to fix it later, too.
Exactly. You just have to get over that, like, get it out and get it going. Like, this culture thinks that you need software out there like 60 days. Should be running and should be servicing people outside.
Well, and to piggyback on Rachel's point, hackers like to talk. DEFCON, DerbyCon, Black Hat, all of those talks are all on YouTube for the last 5, 7, 8 years. If you can find someone doing an attack on something like the technology that you're using in your company, come to an organization like this. Somebody here will be able to help you. Somebody will be able to build that proof of concept where you can go have a meeting and say, look, I didn't try really hard, and here's what I did to our app.
I think that's probably the most telling thing to do is bring back something.
Sure, and that's still a dangerous point to present, right? Because if they're not even willing to listen, you got to understand where you stand in that organization before you say something. But learning how to do that is super easy. That's what we're here for. That's what we're building from. That kind of thing. So, maybe you can build your resume just in case. In case they don't like your ideas.
Well, that's what happens. If you put that out there and they ignore you, now it's a personal ethics. Okay, I've shown you the whole. I'm telling you it's going to happen. You don't want to do anything about it. Do I just sit here and let you do it? So that's where it gets kind of dicey. So you blow that whistle because now you're a personal ethics online.
You might end up like Ben Simo, he was referenced in like the actual, like in a Senate Exchange Committee or something. Like had not done, and it wasn't like authorized by him or anything, but they just said, you know, look what this guy did, and like they talked about him at Senate hearings based on the healthcare.gov stuff. So you probably don't want to be that name, you know.
Another point to consider with small businesses is that even if you do convince them and show them that small businesses cannot survive reach realistically.
Yes.
I think that probably the number one comeback is like, oh, we're not a target, we're too small. And that's also not true. To demonstrate that they are a target, you can show things like show hand or which is
easier than that. There's their names in like a breach report.
Yeah.
Did you have a LinkedIn, a Home Depot credit card, or any of these?
There are.
You are not too small a target.
Yeah.
You can go around the room, and I'm sure at least somebody other than me has had card replaced twice this year.
I just got an email from Home Depot last week saying my email address was leaked.
Yeah, we have no evidence. I've had 2 new MasterCards this year. If I am a big enough target, an organization or an app or anything like that.
And if you work in IT, you can just show them your firewall. Look what's hitting us every hour.
Yeah.
Don't tell them we're on target.
Yeah, as soon as the company has anything that's the minimal interest to anybody, they'll be a target. Even if they don't, there's just people out there who like to get into systems and break stuff for the fun of it.
It's when you say that, a friend of mine at another startup said that he got a random email from some guy that said, "Hey, I found a bunch of vulnerabilities. If you send me some stuff, I'll tell you what it is." He was like, I thought the guy was like spam or something. He looked him up and he was in a bunch of threads of things. It's more serious.
Yeah, one of I've seen recently those were talking about sort of I guess security intelligence where people are deploying honeypots across the country in different spots to see where attackers are coming from to hit their organization. And within probably hours, certainly a couple of days even, completely new hosts on the internet are already being targeted. So people are out there watching kind of the internet baseline, and anything new comes up, they will go and investigate. It's being a target is not being a target is completely false. You should just assume you are a target and go for it.
Maybe a little bit more to this than I can, because I don't remember the full story. But I know there was an antivirus that went out and put the network out.
We're talking about crypto.
Oh, yeah. And I know that had a couple of all this stuff.
Yeah,
They can support it.
yeah.
There was this guy who really wanted a job, and he decided he would impress us by trying to hack us all the time. And this would show how smart he was, and so we offered him a job. He wasn't like super smart, so like we took his picture and made him his Google Plus profile, and emailing from his personal email, and like, but we weren't very big target. It was just nuts.
Or the best is they replace pages on your website with like movie content for them. Rachelle, I'm back. One more time for Rachelle for her talk. This is your first message from the stage. All right, just a little bit more to close out here. Some upcoming events in the area is a bit of a loose term, but in Charleston, West Virginia, I believe that's this weekend. HackerCon 5 is happening. There's still tickets available. If you want to hit up HackerCon, that's a great place to start. Cleveland Locksport is having its monthly meeting on the 15th. You can check them out at meetup.com/Cleveland Locksport. If you've never picked a lock before, that's where you want to go. They got all the tools, they got all the locks, they got all the people there with experience. They can teach you from the ground up. Great group. And our representatives tonight, Akron Women in Tech, is actually having their meeting tomorrow. So here's the link to their meetup site. If you want to check them out, please do. And that's all. Thank you guys for coming out, and we'll see you next time.